They tore down my fence, claiming it was ugly and illegal. But that fence wasn't just decoration. It was the only thing standing between our entire community and a deadly bear attack. When the bears came, it was too late to fix their mistake. They said my fence was ugly, a blight on the neighborhood's perfect image. HOA Karen was the loudest voice, demanding it come down immediately. The fence wasn't just any fence. It was a tall, reinforced steel mesh barrier built after the bears started coming close last year. Everyone else had their fancy white pickets and low wrought iron, but I needed something strong enough to keep the wildlife at bay. I told Karen that I warned the HOA board, but they just laughed it off, claiming aesthetics over safety. The threat of fines and legal action hung over me like a dark cloud, but I stood my ground. That fence wasn't just for me. It was the thin line separating our community from danger. The morning the demolition crew arrived, the sun barely peeked over the horizon. Karen was there, smiling like she was winning some petty war. The workers wasted no time. The heavy machines roared as they tore through the fence, the metal groaning and twisting as if it was alive and fighting back. I stood frozen, the weight of helplessness crushing me. Calls to local wildlife control went unanswered. The HOA had to approve any safety measures, and Karen was the one blocking it all. I watched as the barrier that had saved us was destroyed for the sake of appearances. Night fell like a shroud, cold and unforgiving. The forest beyond the neighborhood had always been close, but now, with the fence gone, it felt like a gaping wound. I sat on my porch when I first heard the rustling, soft but unmistakable, the crunch of leaves, the snap of twigs. Diesel and Luna perked up immediately, their hackles raised. Shadows moved near the edge of my property. Massive shapes, hulking and deliberate. Bears. The mother bear and her cubs from last year, emboldened by the absence of a barrier. I grabbed my flashlight, heart pounding, and stepped outside. The bears didn't flinch. They lumbered forward, noses twitching, eyes glowing in the beam. The neighborhood was waking up. Shouts and slamming doors echoed as panic spread. I called to Diesel and Luna, who charged with fierce determination, barking and snarling, their teeth bared. The bears hesitated but didn't retreat. The danger was real, and it was right here. The chaos exploded as neighbors poured into the streets, some grabbing anything they could to make noise, others ushering children to safety. The bears moved through the yards, knocking over trash cans, scratching fences, pushing through gardens. The night became a battleground, survival pitted against ignorance. I shouted for everyone to stay calm, to stay together. Diesel and Luna led the defense, their training evident as they confronted the intruders. The bears, frustrated but wary, slowly backed toward the forest edge, but the damage was done. Dawn revealed the aftermath. Broken fences, overturned flower beds, terrified families. I stood among my neighbors, sharing stories of the night's terror. Karen was nowhere to be seen, her earlier confidence shattered by the chaos she'd unleashed. The community rallied to clean up, but the scar of what happened ran deeper than the physical damage. I filed a lawsuit against the HOA, exposing not just the demolition of the fence, but the reckless disregard for safety. The financial records and emails showed Karen's obsession with appearances over protection, her push to control the neighborhood at any cost. Public outrage grew, support poured in, and Karen faced legal consequences she hadn't anticipated. We rebuilt the fence, stronger, taller, more secure. It stood not just as a barrier, but as a monument to what happens when safety is sacrificed for vanity. The bears didn't come back, at least not close enough to threaten us. Diesel and Luna still patrolled the perimeter, loyal guardians of a peace hard won. That fence saved lives, and now everyone knows it. Karen's mistake cost her everything, her credibility, her power, and nearly our safety. The ugly fence became the most beautiful line of defense our community ever had. The sun had just begun its slow climb over the horizon when the first rumble of engines broke the morning silence. I was sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had been creeping in ever since Karen started her crusade against my fence. The fence that everyone called ugly. The fence that Karen insisted had to go. But to me, that fence was more than wood and metal. It was the shield that kept the wild at bay, the only thing standing between our peaceful community and the bears that roamed the nearby forest. I watched as a convoy of trucks and heavy equipment rumbled down my driveway, tires crunching over gravel, engines growling like predators. The demolition crew was here, and they didn't waste a second. Men in hard hats jumped out, barking orders and unfolding tools. Bulldozers and wrecking balls began their assault on the fence, shaking the earth and tearing through the reinforced steel mesh with brutal efficiency. I stepped forward, shouting for them to stop, waving my arms, but my protests were drowned by the noise of destruction. Karen stood at the edge of my yard, arms crossed. A smug smile plastered across her face as if she had just won some petty battle. Her voice carried over the din. This eyesore's gone. The neighborhood will thank me. I tried one last time to reason with her. That fence keeps the bears out. You're putting everyone at risk. She laughed, cold and dismissive. Bears don't belong here. That fence is an overreaction. You build it without permission. It's illegal. The men continued their work, heedless of my warnings. The steel mesh crumpled and twisted, falling in jagged heaps around me. Splinters and shards flew through the air, dust and debris coating everything. My heart pounded, rage and fear colliding in my chest. I wanted to scream, to fight, but I was powerless against the machines and the will of a woman blind to the danger. As the last section of the fence was ripped down, a silence fell over the neighborhood, heavy and ominous. The empty space where the barrier once stood felt like an open wound. The forest, once kept at bay, now had a clear path to our homes. I called wildlife control immediately, desperation pushing my fingers to dial faster than my thoughts could catch up. But I was met with the same response I'd heard before. We can't intervene without HOA approval, the voice on the other end said. You need to go through the proper channels. Channels controlled by Karen, who was already plotting her next move to keep the fence gone. That night, the forest came alive. The rustling began just after dusk, faint at first, and growing louder, closer. My dogs, Diesel and Luna, rose alert and growled low, muscles tense, eyes fixed on the dark tree line beyond the property line. The mother bear and her cubs, creatures we had seen only from a distance before, were here now, emboldened by the open access. I grabbed my flashlight, shining the beam into the shadows. The bears moved deliberately, slow and heavy, nostrils flaring as they picked up scents of food and human presence. I called out to my dogs, urging them to keep the bears at bay. The neighborhood stirred as neighbors emerged, alarms and shouting mixing with the bears' grunts and the crashing of their heavy bodies through gardens and fences. The bears crossed where the fence once stood, stepping onto lawns, sniffing trash cans, knocking over bird feeders. Panic rippled through the streets as doors slammed and families scrambled inside. Children cried, frightened by the sudden invasion of wild beasts. Diesel and Luna leapt into action, barking ferociously, teeth bared as they confronted the massive creatures. The bears growled, their dark eyes gleaming in the flashlight's glow, but they hesitated, wary of the fearless dogs. I rallied my neighbors, shouting instructions to grab pots, pans, flashlights, anything that could make noise and scare the bears back toward the woods. The tension was palpable. Every second stretched thin. Every movement could trigger a charge or a retreat. We formed a human wall, a line of desperate defense against the wild. The night dragged on, a battle of wills and survival. Slowly, under the combined efforts of the community and the vigilant K-9s, the bears retreated, lumbering back into the shadowy forest. Relief washed over us, but the damage was done. Gardens ruined, fences broken, trust shattered. When dawn broke, the reality of the night's chaos settled in. Karen was nowhere to be found, her previous arrogance replaced by silence and absence. The community gathered to assess the damage, voices rising in outrage and fear. The fence that had once been called ugly was now a symbol of safety, a barrier that had kept the wild world at bay. I took action. I gathered evidence, videos of the demolition, messages from the HOA, photos of the damage, and bears on the loose. I reached out to neighbors, collecting statements from those who had felt the terror firsthand. Together, we filed a lawsuit exposing the reckless negligence of the HOA board and Karen's obsession with aesthetics over safety. The media caught wind of the story, and public outrage swelled. Karen's reign crumbled under the weight of scrutiny. Legal battles ensued, and Karen was held accountable for her role in putting the community at risk. Fines, lawsuits, and public condemnation followed swiftly. In the end, we rebuilt the fence, stronger, higher, fortified to withstand any threat. The community came together, united by the nightmare we survived, and determined to protect what was ours. Diesel and Luna stood guard, symbols of the fierce protection we needed. That fence, once called ugly and torn down without thought, became the lifeline that saved us all. Karen's mistake was clear. She valued appearances over lives, control over safety, and that mistake cost her everything. The wild stayed at the edge of the woods, and our neighborhood finally breathed again, safe behind the barrier we fought to restore. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that presses down on everything like a weight. The moon hung low, barely lighting the way through the thick trees surrounding the neighborhood. The air was cool but tense, charged with an unease nobody wanted to acknowledge. The fence had been torn down that very day. The fence, the one I built to keep the bears out, was gone. Now the dark line between safety and danger was just an empty space. I stood on the porch, watching shadows move along the tree line, heart pounding. Rustling sounds came first, soft and cautious, like a whisper in the dark. Leaves crunched under heavy steps, twigs snapped, and the scent of earth and fur drifted in the night air. Two massive shapes moved slowly into view, one big, the other smaller, bearing the unmistakable silhouette of a mother bear and her cub. They moved deliberately, noses twitching as they picked up new scents, the faint smell of our neighborhood of homes and food. My dogs, Diesel and Luna, sensed it instantly. They rose from their beds with a low growl, hackles raised, eyes sharp and fixed on the approaching threat. They moved to the edge of the yard, teeth bared, a clear warning. The bears hesitated but pressed on, stepping into the space where the fence once stood. The barrier that had held them back now torn apart by careless hands. I grabbed my flashlight, heart slamming against my ribs as I swept the beam toward the creatures. The light caught their eyes, golden, intense, reflecting wild intelligence and cautious curiosity. The mother bear took a few slow steps forward, the cub sticking close behind her, eyes wide and unafraid. This was their world, and now they had a path into ours. A shout rose from a neighbor down the street. Doors slammed, lights flicked on. Panic rippled like a shockwave through the community. Families scrambled, some calling 911, others ushering children inside, securing pets, locking gates. The bears moved confidently, nosing through flower beds, knocking over trash cans, the faint smell of spilled garbage drawing them further in. Diesel and Luna barked furiously, lunging toward the bears, forcing them to pause. The mother bear growled back, a deep, resonant sound that shook the night. The cub huffed nervously but stayed close. The standoff lasted minutes that felt like hours. Every neighbor who dared step outside grabbed anything they could find to make noise. Pots, pans, whistles. The cacophony was desperate and chaotic but necessary. I yelled for calm and for people to stay together, to back away slowly without turning their backs. The dogs circled the bears, pushing them back inch by inch. The mother bear swiped a heavy paw at Diesel, who dodged just in time, snapping his jaws in response. Luna barked louder, standing firm between the bear and a group of frightened children huddled behind a car. This was a battle for survival, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The bears, confused and frustrated by the resistance, finally began retreating toward the forest edge. Diesel and Luna chased him until they disappeared into the darkness, growling low but no longer charging. The night settled back into uneasy quiet. Families slowly returned to their homes, locking doors, checking windows, hearts still racing. The damage was real. Upturned trash bins, broken flower pots, scratched fences. The peaceful illusion of safety had been shattered, replaced by a raw reminder of the wild just beyond the trees. In the morning, the neighborhood buzzed with disbelief and fear. Conversations turned to anger and blame. Karen was nowhere to be found. Her earlier smugness vanished like smoke. The fence that had been dismissed as an eyesore was now understood to be the only thing standing between us and disaster. I started gathering evidence, photos, videos, witness statements. The community began to rally around the truth. Safety over appearances. Legal action was inevitable. Karen's reckless demand to demolish the fence had nearly cost us everything. That night changed everything. It exposed the thin line between control and chaos, between ignorance and survival. The fence was rebuilt stronger, a silent guardian watching over us all. Diesel and Luna remained vigilant, guardians not just of my home, but of the entire neighborhood's fragile peace. The bears never came back close. The memory of that night stayed with us, a constant reminder of what's at stake when safety is ignored. And though the darkness still presses on the edges of the woods behind that fence, we were safe once more. The bears came through the gap where the fence had been, moving like shadows with heavy steps and steady breathing. The smell of damp earth and pine needles was thick in the night air, mingling with the scent of spilled garbage and crushed flowers. Diesel and Luna were the first line of defense, their teeth bared, bodies low and tense. They lunged forward with fierce barks, snarling and growling, a flash of teeth in the dark. The mother bear responded with a low growl that vibrated through the ground beneath my feet, her cub huffing nervously beside her. It was a standoff, a dangerous game of wills between animals and dogs, humans and nature. Neighbors spilled out of their homes, flashlights and makeshift weapons in hand, eyes wide with fear and adrenaline. Pots and pans clanged together, voices rose into a chorus of desperate commands and warnings. Children were hurried to safety, doors slammed, and car alarms wailed. The chaos was electric, every second stretched to the breaking point. I shouted orders to keep calm, to stay together, to make ourselves bigger and louder. The bears hesitated, confused by the sudden noise and light assault. Their heavy bodies slowed, muscles tense, nostrils flaring as they considered their next move. Diesel charged, teeth snapping just inches from the mother bear's massive paws. Luna circled the cub, barking sharply to keep it away from the crowd. The bears moved back inch by inch, reluctant but recognizing the threat posed by our defiance. The night air was thick with tension and fear, but also with a fierce determination not to lose what little safety we had left. I grabbed a flashlight and started banging it against a metal trash can lid, the ringing sound sharp and loud in the still night. Others joined in, creating a wall of noise that pushed the bears further toward the woods. Every bark, shout, and clang was a line in the battle for our community's survival. The mother bear glanced back once, eyes locking with mine, wild, primal, and filled with a grudging respect. Then she turned, leading her cub back through the trees. The forest swallowed them, and the neighborhood exhaled in relief, but the damage was done. Gardens were destroyed, fences splintered, and a deep unease settled over us. The absence of that fence, torn down for appearances, had nearly cost lives. Diesel and Luna stood guard as the sun rose, tired but alert. The fight to protect our community wasn't over, but that night had proven we could stand together, fierce and unyielding, against the wild and the careless alike. The fence would be rebuilt, stronger and higher, a testament to the lessons learned in the dark. Karen's arrogance had been a costly mistake, one that nearly tore the neighborhood apart. But we survived, and we fought back. Our community was scarred but unbroken, united by the fierce love for home and the unwavering determination to protect it, no matter what came next. Karen's smug smile vanished the moment the judge read the verdict. $1,600,000 in damages, fines, and legal fees. The courtroom buzzed with a tension so thick it felt like the walls might crack. She sat rigid, eyes darting around, realizing this wasn't some petty HOA disagreement anymore. It was a costly reckoning. For months, the community had watched Karen's reckless crusade unravel. The fence, once dismissed as an eyesore, was now a symbol of protection and survival. Every broken board, every twisted wire that had kept the bears from trampling through yards and terrorizing families was part of the story that changed everything. The bears never should have been allowed through, but Karen had ignored every warning, prioritizing control and image over safety. Neighbors came forward with stories, nights spent huddled inside, children too scared to play outside, pets lost or hurt during the chaos, families that called for help only to be told no because the HOA had to approve any wildlife interventions. The lawsuit revealed emails where Karen mocked those who pleaded for common sense, dismissing the fence as a nuisance that lowered property values. It was a cold, calculated decision, and the consequences had been devastating. When the bears broke into the neighborhood, it was Diesel and Luna who saved lives. Those dogs became local heroes, their fierce loyalty a stark contrast to the cold indifference of old leadership. The entire community rallied to rebuild the fence, not just to restore boundaries, but to heal the breach of trust and safety. Fundraisers, volunteer work, and late-night patrols replaced the fear with determination. Karen, stripped of her HOA presidency and credibility, found herself isolated. The legal costs alone would wipe out any gains from her little victory against the fence. The $1.6 million judgment wasn't just about money. It was a message. Neglect and arrogance had real consequences. Safety wasn't negotiable. Community was more than appearances. The rebuilt fence stood tall, a fortress against the wild. Behind it, the neighborhood breathed easier. Children played outside without fear, and the night held no more shadows. Diesel and Luna watched over us all, silent sentinels reminding everyone what was at stake. Justice had been served, but the scars remained. The story of that fence, the fight to keep it, and the bears that came through the gap would be told for years to come, a cautionary tale about respect, responsibility, and the true meaning of home.